feel like I'm old enough to have earned the right to say this phrase. And so, back in my day, shut up, Jared. Back in my day, us kids in Central Arkansas, man, a great day would be when a friend invited you to go to Wild River Country with them. If you've ever been there, congratulations. And if you haven't, you are missing out, or you were when I was a kid at least. I know it's kind of gone a little bit downhill, but so it's a water park if you've never been there and can't infer that from the name. But it was a lot of fun. You go and ride all the water slides, all that kind of stuff. One of the things that we would love to do would be go out in the wave pool. So you get a tube, get out there and float, and periodically, the way it's set up, it's got a thing that churns out those waves and makes waves in the pool, and you float on the waves, and it stops for a while and does it again, all that kind of stuff. And so, but we loved to go do that without a tube. Me and my friends would go out and wade out in the water to where we weren't we could still touch, but maybe it was just about up to here. They would start the waves, and then you jump with the waves, and it kind of feels like you're jumping really high. So as little boys, we thought that was just the coolest thing ever, that we were jumping high like NBA stars and all that kind of stuff. So we would do that. And the problem was that sometimes the way you would push yourself off with momentum, it would make you go deeper instead of back by being pushed by the wave. And so one day I was there, and I was doing that and having a blast and not paying attention. And I didn't realize that all my friends had been pushed back, but I had been jumping into the waves, and so I was going over them. And all of a sudden, one came, and I floated up with it. When I came back down, I couldn't touch the bottom. And I was like, uh-oh, this is probably not good. So I tried again, I can't get it. And now I'm out there where all the tubes with all the people are, and I'm starting to get a little nervous, and the waves keep coming, and I can't touch, and then the tubes start floating in and banging me on the head and knocking me under and all that kind of stuff. Nobody sees that this little boy is floating in the water and can't touch. And I remember in that moment thinking, I'm about to drown. This is it for me. Luckily, the waves stopped, and on top of that, a nice lady realized that there was a child there, and so she helped me onto her tube when they stopped and got back to this. So no lifeguard had to dive in and save my life or anything like that. But I remember that very real fear of just the water being there and being powerless to do anything with it. And so tonight we're going to be in Mark chapter 4, and we're going to look at a story where I think the disciples would probably say, yeah, we get that feeling. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 4. That's the second book in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. Mark is my favorite gospel, and my reason for it being my favorite is super spiritual, okay? It's because it's the shortest one. And so Mark is very this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. Kind of like that friend that tells you a story, but they won't take a breath while they're telling the story. She's and this is, and they tell you all the stuff that happened. That's kind of the way Mark writes. He just uses the word immediately a lot in the text. And so here's what's going on. In Mark chapter 4, in the first couple of chapters, Jesus, the Son of God, has come to the earth. He has called his disciples to follow him. He's proclaimed the kingdom of God, and he's been doing that for a while. And so right before this, he's been standing on the shore of what's called the Sea of Galilee, which is not a sea, it's a lake. And he's standing on the shore teaching, and he's been doing it for a long time. And so he tells his disciples, all right, guys, grab a boat, and we're actually going to go out to the other side of the lake. We're going to sail across the water, or row across the water in their case. So that wouldn't have been anything that was shocking for his disciples. If you're familiar with his story at all, Jesus, some of the guys that he calls to follow him are fishermen. And so their livelihood up to that point had been spent in boats. So that's not anything that would have been foreign to them or anything. So they grab a boat, they all pile in, and they kind of know, man, here's what to expect. Here's how to handle different situations as we get out on the water and all that kind of stuff. Let's go. And so that's where we're picking up the story. In Mark chapter 4, if you've got a Bible, you can turn there. If you've got the app, you can use that, or you can follow along up on the screen. So Mark chapter 4, verse 35. Let's just start walking through this story. It says, as evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. So here we go. They hop in this boat, and traditionally, with the kind of fishing boat that they would have just had on hand, because in the Sea of Galilee, that was one of the major trade things, was that you could go out and fish, and you could sell the fish and make money for your family. And so there would have been a lot of boats just pulled up on the shore. Chances are that anybody that was on the shore, either in Jesus' disciple group or with the people that are listening to him, may have owned one of those boats. And so when this Rabbi Jesus, who is really famous and popular at the time, comes along and says, I need a boat, you're like, you can take mine. And so they hop in a boat. Most of them would have been about 25 to 30 feet long. and about 8 feet wide. So we're not talking anything that's like as small as your flat-bottom bass fishing boat. For some of you guys that have one of those or have been in one of those, but it's going to be a little bit bigger than that, but it's not a huge ship. It doesn't have like a mast with a mainsail or anything like that. It's just enough to fit, a few people or Jesus and his disciples, kind of comfortably, but they would have been packed in. There might have been a compartment below deck, but it wouldn't have been like a big room or anything like that, just mainly for storage. So they hop in the boat and they head over to the other side. Jesus has been teaching. Again, he's really popular, and so you can see there that other boats follow. They throw in that detail to say, man, he's so popular. When he gets in the boat to go away with his disciples, these people that have been listening are like, well, I want to hear some more, and they hop in boats and follow him too. So they start out across the water, which sounds all fine and normal until we get to verse 37, where it says, soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. So we come up on that, and it's like normal, and then all of a sudden it's bad news bears. Like, this is not the ideal situation, but it was also not uncommon. I had the privilege to be able to go to Israel in college for a 2-week thing that I actually got college credit for, which was awesome. But we went out on the Sea of Galilee. We actually got to stay at a hotel like on the banks, and then we got to go out on a boat in the middle, and we got to read these stories when we were out there. It was pretty awesome. But one of the things that I've noticed immediately about the Sea of Galilee, and any book that you read about that area of the world will tell you, the Sea of Galilee sits in what's basically a bowl. Everything around it is a hill or a mountain. There is no like plain leading up to it or anything like that, or a steady slope. They're tall, tall hills, which means when a storm comes in or when the wind starts to blow, it gets down in there and it basically just swirls and swirls around and gets stuck in that bowl and it can't really get out. And so when storms come up, they come up quickly and they are pretty fierce when they get there. Fishermen, even to this day at the Sea of Galilee, will call those storms that would form in like the east, they call them sharks because of their severity. Like they're going to come in, they're going to attack, it's going to be quick and it's going to be bad news. And so here Jesus is paddling, or in the boat with his disciples. They're paddling across the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden this storm comes up. And not only does the storm come up, but the text tells us that they're looking and they see that the water is actually pouring into the boat over the sides, because it's not a big, massive boat. And so you're rocking in the waves and the storm's raining down and the waves are crashing up and all that kind of stuff. It's going to come over the side quite a bit. So you've got lightning flashing across the sky, thunder is shaking your chest, waves crashing in over the boat. And so basically for everybody in the boat, this is what's in nautical terms, right? This is an all hands on deck moment. Like, it is time for everybody to pitch in and get us out of this situation, or we are all going to die. This is not just like, no, it's just a little squall. It's just a small storm, right? No, like we see here in this next verse that Jesus' disciples freak out, and these are fishermen. And if the fishermen are worried, you should probably be concerned. But what's crazy is, and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we started off this series with Jonah, it was common for these people at this period of time to look at big bodies of water like the lake, the Sea of Galilee, or the ocean as representative of what they termed chaos. That was where evil resided. That's where bad stuff happens. And so for them to go out and not only is a storm coming in and that's bad, but also to them, chaos is kind of rearing its head. Like bad stuff is happening and we're up against forces that's more than just the wind and the rain in their minds. That's how they understood it. And so in verse 38, it says, Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?" I mean, this storm has rolled up. It's rocking the boat. Thunder, lightning, all the things, just like Queen tells us, right? That was a Bohemian Rhapsody joke for anybody that caught that deep cut. Thanks, Gunnar. So yeah, the storm has come up. It's frightening the fishermen, which again should make you concerned. If the guys that have spent their lives on the water are now worried about drowning, you're in trouble. And they find Jesus asleep. He's got his head on a cushion, and that dude is out cold. How in the world could he possibly be asleep right now? If you were to ask Jen, for the first 7 years of our marriage, she was confounded, confused by the fact that I was such a light sleeper that anything would wake me up. And so when we started fostering and the boys came to our house, their room was on the other side of the house. And if one of them started crying in their room without a monitor, I could hear it and wake up and go. I don't know why. That's just the way that it was. And then we had Ella, and we had a newborn in our room with us. And for some reason, I would not hear Ella when she was screaming in the room. In the middle of the night, babies wake up a lot, in case you didn't know that. So in the middle of the night, baby needs a change, baby needs to be fed, baby needs the things I need to help with as a father. I need to take care of my child. I need to love my family well and lead my family well. And I would do that if I was awake. But I was, I guess, so exhausted from having a newborn that Ella, literally a couple of feet from me, is screaming as loud as a baby possibly can. And Jen gets up, moves the bed because when you get out of bed, you're going to shake the things that are all around. So she gets up, shakes the bed. She gets Ella. She goes and sits in the chair, the rocker in the corner of our room, and tries to console her. And Ella's not calming down. And Jen, I remember it. Jen yelling at me from across, "Cameron, wake up! Like, how are you asleep right now?" But she just didn't understand. She was so frustrated. That's probably the maddest I've ever seen my wife. It wasn't intentional. I didn't I'm just going to lay here and let her take care of it. I would have helped if I'd have been awake. I was just asleep. I don't know if you've ever slept that deeply. But that's the situation that Jesus is in. All the other disciples are freaking out, and here he is asleep. And we see that in the middle of this chaos and in the middle of this storm, Jesus is at peace. In fact, go back and read the Gospels, and the only time that it's recorded that Jesus was asleep, I'm not saying he didn't sleep, they just didn't feel the need to write it down any of the other times. The only time it's recorded is here. In the middle of a storm, in the middle of a boat, in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. We see Jesus here unfazed and undeterred because this storm is not going to rob him of his peace. But what are all the disciples doing? And they are fighting for their lives. "Teacher, why don't you care about us? Don't you care that we're going to drown?" Not that we're in danger. It is a foregone conclusion that they were going to die. Isn't that so typical of us? A storm rolls in. These disciples have been following Jesus through most of his earthly ministry. At this point, he hasn't been there for a very long time doing this stuff yet, but he has also, it's told in Mark, he's already healed somebody. He has already cast out demons. He's already preached about grace in the kingdom of God. He's performed miracles that give clues about who he is. He's taken care of these men and called them to leave everything behind and follow after him. But the second a storm hits, they turn around and say, "Don't you care about us? Why aren't you doing anything?" And we do that all the time in our own lives, don't we? When a storm hits, we blame God for his role in this. "God, how can you allow this in my life? God, why is this okay with you? Lord, I was so excited about being a part of this team, and I did the tryouts, and I didn't make the team, and why don't you care? God, I studied, and I did all this stuff to make a good grade in this class, and then I failed the test, and now I've got a bad grade. Why are you allowing this to happen? God, my parents are not doing well, and they're going to split up and divorce. God, why have you allowed this to happen in my life? God, I'm dating so-and-so, and my significant other has dumped me and broken up with me. Don't you even care?" Everything's going fine until a storm hits. And then we want to turn around and quickly blame God, when in reality, we need to look at it and see that he may be allowing this storm in our lives to show us something. Here's the deal. Jesus is Jesus, right? He's fully God and fully man. And so when he told his disciples, "Let's get a boat and go to the other side," did he know that a storm was coming? Absolutely 100% yes. And yet he told them to do it anyway. It's not a surprise to him. It didn't catch him off guard. You see, this storm here, it's not an accident. It's an opportunity for something. And so we keep going in the next verse, in verse 39. It says this: "When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, 'Silence, be still.' And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm." Now notice, you guys, what stopped the storm was not the prayers of the disciples. What stopped the storm was not them making a sacrifice to God. It was just basically the word of God. Jesus stands up and says, "Silence, be still." And the language in the Greek that they use here is kind of like this idea of something that's dangerous, like having a muzzle put on it and being subdued. Like if you've got an animal that's really angry and aggressive and they stick a muzzle on it to where it can't really actually do any harm at that point. Like it's kind of that kind of language. Like Jesus is essentially muzzling this storm and just stands up and speaks. Says, "Hey," if we were to use our terminology, "shut up," to the storm. And it does. Like Jesus speaks and commands this thing to happen, and that is what is going on. It falls into line. Now, what are we seeing here? We're seeing Mark is using this story to show us and model for us this idea of peace. Showing us that this Jesus guy, who these disciples follow, they claim he's a teacher and a rabbi, and they come to see that he is the Son of God. He has the power of God in him. And you read all throughout the Bible, and you're going to see that only God can calm the storms. Only God can control nature. So in this moment, we're getting confirmation of exactly who Jesus is, that he is the very essence God. He is God himself. He speaks to chaos, and it listens. He speaks to nature, and it listens. And we've already seen in Mark, if you go back and read the first couple of chapters leading up to this story, Jesus speaks to sickness and it leaves. Jesus turns and speaks to demons and they flee. And now he turns and he speaks to nature and it obeys. And Mark, in writing this down, couldn't be any more clear. In the storms that we come across in this world, there's a peace that comes with having the power over everything. The power of the Creator, and that power is found in the person of Jesus. For there to be peace, there must be Jesus, and without Jesus, there is no peace. See, in our lives, God might allow storms to be there for a reason. We've talked about that. This is now the 4th week of this series. Sometimes God will allow a storm in our lives just so we experience the consequences of our actions. We've made a decision to sin, and we're dealing with the consequences of that. Sometimes those storms are sent because they just happen. Like it's not anybody's fault. It's just part of living in a broken, fallen world. Sometimes those storms are crafted by God and he's sent to us to get our attention so that he can redirect us and call us to go somewhere or do something specific like we saw last week. But no matter the storm, they're an opportunity for us to see the fact that Jesus is the only one who can bring us peace. You know, we just saw the disciples, they tried to endure the storm and they couldn't calm it. But Jesus wasn't worried because he knew that him just speaking would bring peace. See, the disciples are freaking out, and they're probably talking all back and forth when the storms hit, and they're probably at the oars rowing as hard as they possibly can, and all the fishermen are trying, we should go this way, you should do this, bail the water out, all the stuff. I'm sure it was full-fledged panic in that boat, and they're trying to fix the problem on their own. But it wasn't them that was going to be able to solve it. Because peace in these storms only comes from Jesus. And so in Jesus, all the storms that happen in our life, no matter why they happen, those storms can have purpose. Because in Jesus, we have access to the one that not only sees us through it, but can also bring us peace in it. So those of you who say, I'm walking through a storm right now, like there's something going on in my life that's difficult and I don't quite understand what's happening, and it's been really hard for me to just navigate through this in my life. It's been really difficult. Maybe the storm that you're in is supposed to help you realize that no amount of you bailing the water out or rowing is going to save you. Instead of trying to effort or work your way out of it, what would happen in these storms if you just fixed your attention and your eyes on Jesus instead? That you trusted in him and understood that peace comes from him and him alone. That is all throughout Scripture. But if you're taking notes and you want to have a couple of passages to go read later that talk about peace that comes from God and God alone in his presence, Psalm 3, 5, and 6, Psalm 4, 8, Psalm 34:4 and Proverbs 3:24 all talk about God's presence bringing us peace. And if you didn't get those, I'll be happy to give those to you after we're all finished up. Just come find me. Jesus speaks to this storm, and it stops. But the story doesn't stop there because there's a little bit more that goes on. And so verse 40, it says, Jesus asked the disciples, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And the disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." I mean, imagine how frightening that would have been. Not the storm. The storm is now past. But you're in the middle of the lake. You just stood in the middle of a storm that you thought was going to take your life, and Jesus was asleep. He wakes up, speaks, like just tells the storm to quit, and it stops. I mean, we were told they do this at the end of the day that he's been preaching, so it's possible that it's nighttime outside, it's dark, so you're sitting there in the dark, in a boat, in the middle of a lake where a storm was just raging around you. Jesus stands up and says, "Peace, be still," and puts a muzzle on the storm, and it stops. And then he turns to you and says, "Do you still not believe in me? Why are you afraid?" Why were you afraid in the middle of all this stuff that was going on? That's called a rebuke, right? And his rebuke isn't even for them trying to fix it. His rebuke, first and foremost, is for them being afraid. I mean, he calls them out on the fear that they had, essentially saying, "Do you not know the love that I have for you? Do you not trust the power that I have to save you?" And yet here the disciples are, and they're scared. You've probably heard it said that the most common command in Scripture is "do not be afraid." That command pops up more than any other in all the Bible. Why is that so? Here's the deal, students. Fear and faith are exclusive. As long as we fear the world, we won't live out faith in the one who made the world. As long as we're afraid, we are not relying on Jesus for our peace, for our purpose, and for our very life. So as we've seen the last few weeks, and as I'm sure you've had demonstrated in your own life, our lives are going to have storms, right? There are going to be things that go wrong. The question for us is, who are we going to be afraid of? Like the storm that is raging around us, or the one who made the heavens, or the storm that builds up in the heavens? I want to read Psalm 95 for you guys. I don't have it on the screens, but hopefully you can just listen to what this says. Psalm 95, 3-7 says, "For the Lord is a great God, a great King above all gods. He holds in his hands the depths of the earth and the mightiest mountains. The sea belongs to him, for he made it. His hands formed the dry land too." So those first couple of verses, the psalmist is saying, look, God holds all of this in his hand. He created everything. The sea, the dry land, the valleys, the mountains, everything that we can possibly see, God made. He is the King of kings. He sits over everything. He's the one true God. And so our response to seeing that might, that power, that fact that God holds everything in his hands, verses 6-7 says this: "Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God. We are the people he watches over, the flock under his care." When we see his control, we actually step back and we worship and we kneel, and in that we find peace. Students, I would say to those of you who are going through a storm right now, the greatest thing that you can do is to take a second and regain your perspective by fixing your eyes on Jesus and rest in the peace that comes with the greatness of God. Because sometimes God will bring a storm into our lives to teach us peace. And every single storm that we encounter is going to be an opportunity for us to lean into that and have faith and embrace the peace that only Jesus gives, or be afraid and look for solutions to fix the problem on our own, which will never work. Faith and fear are exclusive. I mean, you can trust Jesus in the storm, or you can choose to be afraid, but only one of those is going to bring you peace and the power to actually weather through that storm, experience God in it, and then know where he's sending you when he brings you through it. So here's how I want to close out tonight. I would like for you guys to just take some time to sit and really think and pray on that. Some of you, I know just from talking to you and keeping up with you, you're walking through, there's a storm going on in your life right now. And you need to just be reminded of the peace that Jesus brings. If that's not you, you've either been through something or you will be going through something soon. That's life. So in this moment, I think it would be good for all of us to just take a second and reorient and refocus our lives on the only one who can give us peace. And so while we do that, we're actually going to just turn up some sounds of storms just to remind us of the fact of who Jesus is and what he's done. So I'm going to give you guys some time to pray. And I know for a lot of you, this may not be a common practice. We're going to actually take some time to dwell in this. So lean in and really ask God to help you focus your eyes on him and seek his peace. And then I'll come up